Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So, in the recent interview between GameSpot and Mihoyo, Mihoyo basically came out and said that they're not interested in doing any endgame combat related content for Genshin Impact in the future. So, besides Spiral Abyss, which is the only piece of endgame combat content we have in Genshin from the very start of its lifespan, I don't think we're going to get anything else in the future. Whatever we have now is what we're going to have for the remainder of Genshin's lifespan, and that's being the source of a lot of drama in the Genshin player space recently, but I would actually argue that this affects content creators more because my general impression of things is that more Genshin content creators, at least relative to the demographics of Genshin's player base, are more focused on the combat side of things. There are a lot of Genshin content creators who just do character guides, who do theory crafting, and who explain mechanics in Genshin in general, at least for combat. But let's be honest, the Spiral Abyss is not that hard right now. I can clear it with a free to play Dendro Traveler. I have a C3 cutting, and I can clear the Spiral Abyss with those two characters as the core of my teams. So Kuching is not like the best character ever. She used to be like a pretty underwhelming character, but with the advent of Dendro in 3.0, a lot of the less powerful characters, especially Electro, got buffed. So I would say that the roster for Genshin Impact is actually pretty balanced right now in terms of their overall power levels. Yeah, there are still better characters than others, but it's not like if you just get one character, you're going to be you've gimped your entire account forever. So if you're not pulling on like the absolute worst characters with absolutely no synergy with each other, then you should theoretically be able to clear Spiral Abyss no problem by the time you get to like around AR55. Like I've deliberately chosen to pull for characters that I think are aesthetically appealing, and that's why I think it took longer for me to clear Spiral Abyss than it probably would have if I actually pulled for characters that were just strong like Raiden Shogun. But at this point, even if you don't pull for the best characters, like there's no need to watch character guides or like theory crafting videos, and you don't even need to understand how ICD works anymore because aggravate and the catalyzed reactions are just so, I wouldn't say brain dead, but they're simple enough that you don't really need to understand how they work. Bloom is a bit more complicated, but essentially you just hit something with Dendro and Electro and then you do big damage. That's essentially how it works. And just by doing that, you can clear the current Spiral Abyss. And I even cleared the big poo poo log boss who just goes underground every like 10 seconds with Electro and Dendro. So that boss was the most like frustrating boss that we've had in a pretty long time now. I can't remember the last boss that was this frustrating, but even that I could clear it with just my C3 Kuching. I think she wasn't even C3 at this point. At that point, I think she was only C2, but I was able to clear the Spiral Abyss with Dendro and Electro. So the fact that Mihoyo essentially came out and said this kind of stuff that they're not going to do more endgame combat content because it makes players anxious, that the Spiral base makes players anxious, even though it's already relatively easy, has very much, I would say, devalued the work of Genshin content creators who focus on combat, right? Because there's no need to watch any of these guides anymore. There's no need to understand ICD or theory crafting because there's not going to be any harder content or more interesting combat content than the Spiral Abyss. And that's why I think a lot of Genshin content creators and even just players in general have been questioning why Mihoyo said this shit in the first place. And the reason they gave was, of course, that it causes players anxiety, and a lot of people have said that that's bullshit. But there are also like content creators like Braxophone who have said that in their comments there are a lot of people who say that they don't want more difficult or more combat content for Genshin Impact. That they don't want raids and like co-op combat stuff, more harder content. And some of the comments in my own videos, the few of them that there are, say the same thing. And the surveys that have been done on Reddit, on Twitter, on who does Spiral Abyss and who doesn't, also they say very similar things about the number of players who actually do the Spiral Abyss, which at this point I can say that it's like not controversial that the vast majority of Genshin players don't do the Spiral Abyss. They don't even touch it. They don't do 36 stars. And that's perfectly fine. But it's clear at this point that Genshin Impact caters to the casual player base, that the amount of the proportion of people who manage to do 36 stars who want that harder content is in the minority. But there is still the question, why they had to say it like that. It's like they took a sledgehammer and crushed all our hopes and possibilities for the future of Genshin. And they could have just left it unsaid. It's not like people who have been playing Genshin since the very beginning don't understand that Mihoyo is not only just like not putting endgame combat content into the game, they have the actual tools to do it. They have already put in the work to make the bones of more endgame combat content. We have those things in the events already. We have had the Hyakunin Iki, which was like a roguelike. They could have added that into the endgame and gave it scalable content, give it more difficulty levels, and maybe even give us some like rotating characters with kitted out like artifacts to try out so that we want to pull for the characters more. They gave us the Diluc event, honestly harder than honestly harder than Spell Abyss, and they gave us the tablets event, the potions event, any of these things, even if you took them wholesale and added them to the end game with just, resets, just like Spell Abyss, that would have been an improvement on the end game. But they don't do that. They have the potential, they have the knowledge, they have the ability. They just deliberately choose not to. And that's why I think ultimately the reason they gave is probably not bullshit. That's probably what they believe. And some of the things that have happened since Genshin Impact, I would say, like, if you look at this chart of how popular Genshin Impact is over the last 2 years, I think the general trend of things is that not adding endgame content to the game has not really severely damaged or even damaged Genshin Impact's popularity at all. And there are some really interesting things that you can inference from this, that you can take away from this line chart of how popular Genshin has been for the past 2 years. And I think this also plays a role into why Mihoyo feels like they're comfortable to say this kind of shit now, even though it's been pretty obvious to longtime players for a long time. I think at this point, my theory, my belief right now is that they are actively trying to prune Genshin's player base and trying to prep us for other kinds of content, or like, if you want to believe in the worst, they're trying to get rid of. I think they're trying to get rid of the hardcore players. I think they're trying to get rid of the theory crafters and the combat related Genshin content creators. I don't think that's the image they want to cultivate for Genshin Impact at this point. And the reason why I say this is that if you look at this line chart of Genshin Impact's popularity, oh, by the way, Google Trends, if you don't know, is basically where Genshin Impact, not just Genshin Impact, but where video game content creators come to when they have no content to make for the game. What they do is they put their name into this box right here, and they compare it to a bunch of other games. And if it does well, then they can just, talk about how popular the game is. And if it goes below, they can just bitch about how bad their game is. And whichever way they win, right? Because they get more content. So if you look at this, why is it called a farming game? Okay, I just noticed this, but it's called a farming game. Well, that's actually pretty accurate, I guess, because it's not a mobile game anymore. It's on PC and PS5, and I guess online game would also suit, but whatever. So that's pretty accurate, to be honest. So if you look at this line chart, after Genshin Impact's initial release, it obviously went down in terms of its popularity very hard. From 100%, it went down to 33% interest, and then it just hovered around 33 to 45% for about a year until Inazuma came out, and then it spiked all the way up to 67, and then for Raiden Shogun's release, it also got 68. So this was a pretty significant boost in terms of its popularity and its overall longevity. But what you need to understand is, between this point, between the start of Genshin Impact and the release of Inazuma, what I'm guessing is that Mihoyo was a lot less secure in the continued longevity and popularity of Genshin Impact than it is now, right? If you look at the overall trend of Genshin Impact over the past year, Inazuma's release wasn't even the peak of Genshin's popularity. It was in July. It was in January 2022. So what happened in January 2022? January 2022 was Fleeting Colors in Flight. That was the Lantern Rite Festival. We got Enkanomiya, we got Shenhe, we got Yunjing. This was actually the peak of Genshin's popularity over the past year, rather than the release of Inazuma. So why is this significant? Well, it means that the players for Genshin Impact no longer need a significant new region update for people to get excited about this game. Yes, we got Enkanomiya in 2.4, but it wasn't a new nation, right? It wasn't Sumeru. So what this proves is that Genshin Impact and Mihoyo have more tools in their toolbox now, rather than just, a new Asian update to make people excited for this game. And if you look at the peaks of popularity over here, the next patch, another 66, 63, 55, 60. People are regularly getting excited about this game. People are getting more interested in this game beyond just major region updates now. And this is a severe departure. This is a pretty drastic departure from the first year of Genshin Impact, where, there were region updates as well. We got Dragon Spine, but it was still nowhere near like 73 or 66 or 63, 55, 60. It's pretty clear that in the past year, the average popularity of Genshin Impact has actually increased over the first year of its launch. Ever since Inazuma, this game has been pretty good in retaining its, not just retaining, but increasing its overall like new player base. So I would say that Genshin Impact now is actually possibly more popular than it was when it first launched after the initial launch for the first year of its lifespan. And that's why Mihoyo is ultimately just more comfortable now saying whatever they want, because they've already won they've won the lottery. If you compare this game to like Arknight's Fate Grand Order, which I don't think is controversial to say that it's like one of the most, if not the most profitable gacha games of all time. If you look at the genre that Genshin Impact is competing with, it's it's not even a competition. Genshin Impact has already peaked in terms of its potential. It's gained a very loyal following. It's gained a very powerful like persona in how it generates interest and gets more players to play the game. And this increase over the past year, I think, plays a major role in why Genshin Impact is trying to prune its player base now. Why Mihoyo doesn't want the hardcore content creators to ultimately stay in Genshin Impact. They don't want the image of Genshin Impact to be a sweaty, hardcore, combat-oriented game. Because with this increase in player base, right, with this increase in popularity comes more casual players. It's actually a victim of its own popularity at this point. Because there are so many casual players now, Mihoyo does not feel any need to retain this hardcore Genshin Impact player base. They don't want they don't want the first experience of Genshin Impact players to be watching Tenten's video on how Xiangling is actually the most cracked unit of all time, and literally every single polearm is her signature weapon. That's not the image that Genshin Impact wants for itself, right? So now that they've ascertained Genshin Impact's popularity, which I think is more significant than people make it out to be, because if you look at these spikes, they don't seem that out there from what we got for Inazuma, right? But you have to consider the context for this, right? Inazuma was the first major region content for Genshin Impact. Yes, there was Dragon Spine, but again, it's not a region, it's not a new nation. Inazuma was the first new nation, and not only that, it was based on Japan, right? And ultimately, Genshin Impact is still based on Weebu otaku culture. So the amount of players for Genshin Impact who are going to be interested in Inazuma versus like Sumeru is theoretically going to be higher. But even when we look at this graph, like the peak of interest for Genshin Impact during Inazuma's first launch was 67. And then we look at this spike over here. It's 65, right? It's just a shade lower. But do you know what this spike is? It's July 10th to July 16th, right? July 10th to July 16th. That was the second Golden Apple Archipelago. That was not even a major content update. This was just an event. And not only that, there were no new characters, right? We only got what was it? We only got Kazuha and Klee. Oh wait, that was the wrong one. Yeah, this one is the one. 2.8 Summer Fantasia. We got Kazuha and Klee again, and then Yoimiya as a rerun banner. Actually, these are all rerun banners. And then we got Heizo, who is pretty cool, I guess, but not something that would cause this spike in interest. Or at least I assume. So people are just interested in Genshin Impact for reasons beyond Japanese culture, beyond, the more niche otaku weebu culture now. Genshin Impact is its own thing. Even though it's like very much set within that culture, it does, I think, have its own like lifespan. It does have its own life force, which is weird to say because like you wouldn't think of like an animate franchise, object or a franchise to have its own life force, but that's how I would think of it anyways. It's it's not tied to major region content updates anymore. And even when you compare like Inazuma's launch 67 to the launch of Sumeru 66, it's barely any different. They have retained their interest for Genshin Impact between Inazuma and Sumeru. The lack of endgame content does not seem to have impacted whatsoever. And I think the launch of Sumeru and its resulting interest for Genshin Impact is even more significant than Inazuma because there are a lot of things that I had at first assumed Sumeru did wrong. So let's compare 2.0 and 3.0, right? 2.0 was the immovable god and the eternal euthymia. 3.0, the morn a thousand mornings spring or whatever it's called. So I did a video comparing these two versions, talking about some of the things that people were complaining about. Some content creators were complaining about like the fact that 3.0 was literally just a 2.0 but worse. So 2.0 had 2 new 5-star characters and 1 new 4-star character. We got Sayu, we got Yoimiya, we got Ayaka. For 3.0, I talked about how some of my disappointment about the banners because in 3.0 we only got 1 new 5-star character and 2 new 4-star characters. We got Tignari, whereas in 2.0 we got Ayaka. And obviously Ayaka is going to be the more popular of the duo because Ayaka was literally the standard, the poster child for Inazuma. She was both in the beta as well as in the Traveler's Travail trailer. Whereas Tignari literally did not exist prior to Sumeru. We never knew that he was a thing. He was not hinted at. He was not in the manga. He was not in the trailers. So as far as we knew about him, he was a non-entity. And that's why it's more surprising to me that Sumeru was this popular, even though it didn't have like a cracked banner that 2.0 had. And then we get to 3.1, which had an interest rating of 68. That was when Raiden Shogun came out. And Raiden Shogun was the most profitable banner of all time at the time that she was the first banner, right? And in 3.1, we have 65 versus 68, just a shade lower as well. But again, you have to consider that in 3.1, we get Nilu and we get Sino. Now, Sino is the poster child of Sumeru, but again, he's not a cracked character, so theoretically, there will be less interest for him than Raiden Shogun. But again, the amount of interest that 3.1 generated versus 2.1 is not that different. So it has retained so much of his interest, and I think I'm doing some like hypothesizing now, but I think overall Sumeru is actually going to have a higher average peak of interest than Inazuma because it's like Inazuma blew its load too fast. We got 2 new 5-star characters in the first patch, and then we got Kokomi and Raiden Shogun in the second patch. So that was the Archon and Kokomi who kind of just got shafted. So one of the things I said in the past about 3.0 was that it might actually be really smart for them not to put all of their eggs in the one basket at one time. The fact that they only give us 1 new 5-star character might have been a smart thing. Even though I was skeptical at the time, it seems like Mihoyo was more intelligent than I gave them credit for. Because we are not at the peak of Sumeru's popularity right now. We have not gone the Dendro Archon yet. The Dendro Archon is not coming until 3.2. And then in 3.3, there are rumors that a certain villain is going to be a playable character at that point, and he has been hyped up for 2 years now. He is like the Sumeru Signora for girls, essentially. And I can't imagine that he would be generate less interest than 3.1 and 3.0 because let's be honest, not that many people care about Ignari. And yeah, Sino and Nilu are cool, but they haven't been hyped up to the same extent that this character has. And the Dendro Archon as well, she's also going to be popular simply because she's a Dendro Archon. So I would actually bet that the amount of interest that Sumeru generates in the future, in the next 2 patches, are actually going to be, there's a good chance that they will be higher than what we have been getting in Sumeru right now. So it might go up to like 68 or 69. Maybe it'll be even higher than Inazuma. So the fact that Sumeru didn't blow their load all at one time is actually the best thing that Mihoyo has done for Genshin Impact in terms of its overall continued popularity. And I was skeptical at at first because my belief was that they had to come out very strong with a new Genshin Impact update so that people retain their interests, so that they go into the new region thinking that this place is cracked, that everybody is like that we're going to get all this good stuff all at one time. But the fact that they like stringed us along and they increased the overall length of the story quests and separated them into 6 acts rather than just 3 acts that we have traditionally gone for the previous regions. Inazuma, Mondstadt, Liyue, they all had 3 acts, and I don't think it's that neat of an increase in story time because I think my impression is that the acts individually in Sumeru are actually shorter than the acts in Inazuma. But overall, I do think that they have increased the story length, and because of the different structure for the story in Genshin Impact in Sumeru, it doesn't feel as rushed. That was one of the main complaints I had about Inazuma. And actually, I just started this channel. I started this channel complaining about Inazuma, and most of my problems for the story have been fixed. There are still some problems. Like I complained about the lack of combat in the second act for 3.0. But aside from that, after that, in 3.1, I've been having a really great time. I think the world quests are amazing. The Archon quests in general have also been, in my opinion, higher quality than they were in 2.0 in Inazuma. And I would maybe even say that they're better depending how the story ends in the next patch. Depending on how that ends, I might even say that it's better than Liyue. In terms of overall content, I would actually say it's already better than Liyue because the world quests are better. But yeah, I still it still remains to be seen. They can drop the ball really hard in the next patch, and everybody might just quit. So it's too early to say, but there is a good chance that interest in Genshin Impact might actually increase over the next 2 patches compared to Inazuma. So going back to my main point about why Genshin Impact is kind of trying to throw off its hardcore, combat-oriented players now, it's because ultimately Mihoyo feels very comfortable where Genshin Impact is right right now, where it's at right now. They don't want the image of Genshin Impact to be its hardcore players. They don't want the image of Genshin Impact to be like these theory crafters talking about meta, about which characters are meta or not, which characters are the most efficient at this or that. They want to separate the appeal and attraction of these characters from their actual gameplay, which is a very unique thing that most people don't understand about Mihoyo. They're not trying to sell you gameplay, they're trying to sell you idols. And I've already talked about this way too much when it comes to that interview that Dawei did over 11 years ago. But I think it's still relevant today. Their main products are not combat. Their main products are not gameplay. Their main products are idols. And for idols to have intrinsic value because they are good at combat is not their purpose. Their purpose is to create emotional attachment to these characters beyond the combat. It's supposed to be about their story, it's supposed to be about their aesthetics, about what they represent in terms of their cultural and symbolic value. So that is where I think Mihoyo wants to take the game. And because of that direction, and because of Genshin Impact's increased and continued popularity, they don't feel insecure anymore about just saying this outright. In fact, what they probably want to do is to not only call the players, but shift the players over to another genre of game or another more hardcore game that they are making in the future. Maybe that'll be Zenless Zone Zero. Maybe that'll be Honkai Star Rail. But what I've found is that players are not going to disappear. These content creators are not going to disappear. If Zenless Zone Zero turns out to be super popular, they're going to come back to Mihoyo games. They're not going to quit. They'll still be there. Even if they are pissed off, they're not going to quit the game, right? It's their job. So it's kind of like a win-win situation for Mihoyo. It doesn't matter if people get upset. Even if people get upset, that still generates conversation around Genshin Impact, right? So that's my theory for now. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe in the next 2 patches, interest in Genshin Impact will fall off. Like it'll just fall off the cliff of the face of the earth because there's not going to be any endgame content that's being confirmed now. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this whole issue around why they said it. This is Bench Gamer signing out. See you guys later.